powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Somewhere Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
चुन चुन करके हिसाब लेना ये मेरी फितरत है.
Why should it be a problem if I'm smart enough to have multiple options? You should be admiring me.
भारत झुकने वाला भी नहीं.
The rise of India will be determined by India. It will be determined by our strength, not by the mistakes of others.
The old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. India and Korea plan to replace China in key supply chains. See, for last 30 years, China did not dominate Asia because it simply made cheap products. That's the stereotype that has been created over the years. See, China became powerful because it controlled the entire industrial stack. Steel, semiconductors, defense manufacturing, shipbuilding, critical minerals, export logistics. That's where the real power comes from. You have to dominate in something if you want to become a great power. Let's look at the numbers. See, today China produces nearly 30% of the global manufacturing output, and no country in the world comes anywhere near it. More than 50% of world's commercial ships and 1 billion tons of crude steel every year is produced by China. Now, number is so staggering that even the US Department of Defense says that the amount of time US takes to build one ship, one corvette or something, okay, the one ship, China builds 10 ships in that time frame. That's how fast and that's how efficient Chinese shipbuilding is. And this is not a trade dominance, guys, okay? This is not a trade dominance. This is not manufacturing dominance. When you control the full stack, then it becomes a system dominance, okay? Now, let me give you a backstory a little bit. And this backstory is going to explain you why we are seeing everything that's going on around us. And it's going to give you a very good picture, okay? So stay with me till the end because this is going to be a very important video from every angle. See, in 2009, a paper was published, and you can go verify all these things that I'm saying, okay? So the paper was published by Department of Defense, US Department of Defense, where they identified that America's pretty much every hardware that's there, whether it is F-22, whether it is F-35, you just name it, any critical hardware that's there, they all had Chinese chips in them. And their assessment was that because they were Chinese chips, so Chinese were using the hacks in those chips to replicate the design of their fighter jets and all. That's how Chinese actually pretty much around the same time. I mean, US, it took 10 to 15 years for US to build F-22, but Chinese built that same replica of F-22 in a year. How is that even possible? So since that became a national security threat, so US decided to replace everything. And that's when the trade war, the rare earth war and all started. Why? Because to build all the military hardware and all that from scratch with your own material, with your own chips, it requires a massive stack, it requires supply chain and everything else. So that Chinese don't control it, because if Chinese control it, then there is a fear that they will still see Chinese chips in their hardware. You see this? Now, how do you do all that? You have to slow down China in everything, whether it is energy, whether it is trade war, whether it is supply chain, doesn't matter. You have to slow China down one way or the other. Okay. And that's when India and South Korea come into play, because India also realized just 2 3 years ago that India's defense equipments also had Chinese chips in them, and India decided to pretty much uh, get rid of all that. And that's why India is working with South Korea, US, and every other country that's out there, all other partners, to build a manufacturing stack for everything, just like China. Okay. And basically, what India and South Korea are trying to do is they're trying to build an alternative to Chinese supply chains. Okay. And in 2026, both countries pushed their bilateral trade from around $27 billion today to $50 billion by 2030. But as I said earlier, that this is not really about the trade. This is about replacing China in the most important supply chains of the modern economy. Defense production, semiconductors, shipbuilding, steel, export routes through free trade agreement. Because this is how the great powers are built. Because if you don't have a free trade agreement, if you don't have export routes, if you don't control the manufacturing output or anything, that you're not a great power at that point. I mean, there is certain problem, right? You don't become a great power through speeches. You don't become great power through uh, posting nonsensical things on social media or truth social like that, right? So today we are going to break down how India and Korea plan to replace China in key supply chains. We're going to talk about the 5 methods behind it and why this matters for India's industrial future. But before we begin, please do like and subscribe, hit the bell icon, and because this channel follows the system underneath the headlines, right? And also, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help me in keep doing and bring you the authentic and original researched content. Okay, so please do help me help you, and let's grow together. Okay, let's begin. Let's get started. Please do like and subscribe. All right. See, the first method is defense manufacturing. And this is the most important one because defense creates the deepest industrial dependency. A normal trade deal can be reversed, but defense production chain cannot be reversed because it takes forever after that. Okay. And India and South Korea's defense cooperation has existed for years. This is not just recent thing. But the real acceleration started with K9 Vajra T program. In 2017, India ordered 100 K9 Vajra self-propelled howitzers worth more than $700 million. This was based on South Korea's Hawaha K9 Thunder platform, and manufactured inside India's Larsen and Toubro. It's a company. And the reality is that actually the real story was not even about the purchase and all, it was localization. Okay, because that's when India had started this whole made in India or make in India program, where India was asking the companies to come and make in India. So that's what it was. Now, more than 80% of that platform, that K9 Vajra, was localized inside India for the first time. What does that mean? It means that local assembly, local suppliers, local industrial participation, local long-term capability building and all that. Okay. And then came the next phase. Next phase was in 2024 and 25. India moved towards another order of 100 additional K9 Vajra systems. Then Hanwha signed a contract worth roughly $250 million for component supply and deeper local assembly. And in 2026, this was actually made even bigger. Just 2 days ago, actually in April 2026, both government officials moved towards what they call the third phase of defense cooperation. Now, this is very critical. Why is that? Because the first phase was supply, second phase was localization, third phase is co-development, meaning that co-development with the technology transfer. That includes what? It includes anti-aircraft guns, missile systems, future air defense platforms, joint design, technology transfer, and co-production. This is something India does with its very, very reliable and close partners. And one of them is Russia. Okay. And now this is South Korea, where India is going to do a co-production with them. Okay. And this means that the relationship is shifting from buyer seller to long-term defense industrial partnership. And this is how you counter, guys. Okay. See, if you cannot set up the full stack on your own, now you have to understand this, that for what China has accomplished today, it took China almost say 40 years to get where it is today. Okay. So for India to accomplish all that in just few years, 5-10 years, it's I would say not that feasible, or it's unrealistic expectation in a way. So for if India wants to do it, India will need partners. Okay. Now China can steal the technology and all that, but India doesn't want to do that. Okay. So that's why India is looking for partners, and India is honestly saying that, hey, do the technology transfer, do a TOT, and let's do a co-production so that we both can do the profit sharing. Why? Because we can provide you the scale. If you provide us the technology, then we both can co-produce. Okay. Now, so what happens is that, see, with the co-production comes something else, that because once a country buys a defense platform, it also buys what? Spare parts, then maintenance, the future upgrades, then training systems, then software integration, then decades of strategic dependency. So India spends almost $75 billion annually on defense, which is actually, I would say, I think it has gone up. It was 75 to 80 billion dollars. Okay, and probably they are going to increase it to up to $100 billion. And this is how India and South Korea are going to at least counter China's supply chain in defense. Now, the second method is semiconductors and electronics. And here's the most important example is Samsung. In 2018, India's Prime Minister Modi and South Korean President Moon Jae-in, they inaugurated Samsung's expanded Noida plant. You have to go and see that facility is so beautiful and so huge. Okay, the factory became one of the largest mobile phone manufacturing facility in the world. Now, for those who don't know, there are only two countries that dominate in chip manufacturing. One is TSMC, second is South Korea, and then comes China too in the picture. Okay, so the capacity basically expanded from around 68 million phones per year to around 120 million phones annually, which is massive, right? But once again, the real story is not about phones. We are not here to talk about the phones. We are here to talk about what? We are here to talk about China's replacement. How are we going to replace the Chinese supply chain? See, China built electronic dominance step by step. Now, if we go back in time, okay, we'll come back to this thing again, but let's go back in time a little bit. Let's say 20-30 years ago. Okay. In the beginning, it was South Korea, it was Japan, it was TSMC. This triangle was the backbone of every semiconductor chip that's out there, from 25 nanometer chip. Japanese were pioneer of that. Okay. But then something happened. And that something was that Japan started to do really, really well. And Americans had problem with that. Why? Because if Japan becomes stronger, then chances were that Japanese were going to kick Americans out of Japan and their military base and all that, right? It's just an insecurity and a feeling, right? So they decided to remove all that from American market, and that hurt Japanese market completely. In fact, Japanese cars and all were also halted at that point too. And what they did is that they made the biggest mistake of their time. And the biggest mistake was that to counter China, they started to shift their supply chain to counter Japan. They started to shift that supply chain a little bit to China. And that's when the real rise of China's semiconductor industry began. Okay. First, it was assembly, then components, then suppliers, then semiconductors, then complete ecosystem control. Like India's Prime Minister said, that we are not going to just do one aspect of the chip design or something. We are going to build end to end complete ecosystem in India. And that's why India is trying to climb that same ladder. And Samsung proves Korean manufacturing can scale inside India. In fact, if let's say countries that are part of PAC Silica, okay, I don't know if you guys know about PAC Silica or not, but PAC Silica is the semiconductor alliance started by the United States, and in which your Japan, South Korea, India, all these countries are part of that PAC Silica. And this is part of this whole friend shoring thing that policy that United States has developed over the years, okay, to counter China's manufacturing. So by now, but now 2026 this partnership between South Korea and India, it's gonna go beyond all that. And it's gonna go into what both countries are going to specifically identify and build what semiconductors, telecom equipments, then display systems. I would say what secondary batteries, critical minerals, rare earth processing, all that they're going to do. And then chances are that they're going to get into the electric vehicle market as well, because that is the next thing that we are going to talk about. Okay, they're going to get into the electric vehicle market as well, because US is banning all Chinese electric vehicles in the country. And to counter China, all this is being done. Okay, in fact, Foxconn, TSMC, all these companies are investing heavily into US as well in the supply chain. And all this matters because no modern industrial power survives without semiconductor depth. Why? Because we are in the fourth industrial revolution. We are in it. As we get deeper into the fourth industrial revolution, you have to keep up. You have to keep up with the energy demand. You have to keep up with the supply chain. You have to keep up with the mineral supply chain. You just name it. Everything, the full stack. And any country that falls behind will probably end up on the menu. Like Mark Carney once said, that middle power must work together. Otherwise, if you're not on the table, you are on the menu. Okay. So cars depends on the chips, then defense systems depend on chips, artificial intelligence depends on the chips, power grids depend on chips. You just name it. I mean, even if you want to get into space tech, that depends on the chip. So that's why semiconductors are very, very important at this point. So India's semiconductor incentive mission itself is worth around $10 billion. And India has just received almost, I would say, $100 billion investment already into the semiconductor industry and AI and all that. And because also India needs the semiconductor, because first of all, India has to be on top of the game in the fourth industrial revolution. Like India's foreign minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar once said that we were left behind. We missed the opportunity of first three industrial revolutions, but we don't want to miss the opportunity in the fourth industrial revolution. We want to be ahead in the game in the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, so reason is that because without semiconductor depth, there is no strategic autonomy. Like I said earlier, right? What happened in 2009? Remember that? If US, India, all these countries had that semiconductor depth, do you really think that they would have relied on Chinese hardware and Chinese chip in their defense equipment? No, right? So so that's the number one thing. You are not only, this is not a matter of just the national security. It's a matter of strategic autonomy too. Look at China, how Chinese were actually applying uh, the trade embargo on all these rare earths, their raw material, right? That can become a serious problem. So method two is very clear that India is going to use Samsung's industrial base, expand electronics manufacturing, move into semiconductor ecosystem, and reduce dependence on China-linked electronic chains. And that is method two. And this is how the whole entire Park Silica is going to operate. So whatever semiconductor chips and everything that the India and South Korea are going to manufacture and build, that's going to be shipped to who? That's going to be shipped and exported to other countries, including all the Western countries like Europe, the United States, and all that. Why? Because at the end of the day, if you look into it, then it is being built with the help of India's partners in the United States, right? So there is that. Okay, so that's what the method two is. The third method is shipbuilding, and most people, they completely underestimate it. And why shipbuilding is important? See, you may be a manufacturing power, you may be producing all kinds of products and all that, but if product is not shipped anywhere, if you don't have the capability to ship the product all over the globe, then there is a problem, right? Because that becomes a bottleneck. That's why shipbuilding is very important. Now, around 95% of India's trade volume moves by sea. Since the ancient times, India actually was the first one to navigate through oceans. That's how India did from the get go, since the beginning of time. But China dominates the global commercial shipbuilding. China has always focused on capacity. So that means that China's influence shipping capacity. China influences logistics reliance. China influences strategic trade security and all that. So if India wants to become a true Indo-Pacific power, which India already is, don't get me wrong here, okay? But if you want to grow that power, if you want to make sure that you dominate it, then India cannot depend on foreign shipyards forever. It needs domestic shipbuilding capacity or capability. So that's why the 2026 India Korea shipbuilding agreement matters so much. So what happened in just recently when Korea's president visited India, and both countries signed a comprehensive framework for what was that? Partnership in shipbuilding and shipping and maritime logistics. Now think about it. India is signing this pact with South Korea, whereas at the same time India is releasing its own insurance, maritime insurance, and all that too. So India openly invited Korean shipbuilders to become anchor partners for large greenfield shipyard projects. And this is where HD Korea Shipbuilding becomes critical. It's a company. So they signed the MOU for major shipbuilding development in South India. That means that South India, I don't mean that India is divided into southern, but more so like say southern India. That's appropriate, okay? So that means new shipyards, then repair ecosystems, then industrial transfer, then long-term maritime capability, all that, okay? Now, like I said earlier, that it's never about one particular thing. That in this case, ships, like in semiconductors, it was not just about semiconductors. You have to build the full stack for semiconductors. Think about it, okay? So this is how, so we come down to shipbuilding. When you look into shipbuilding, this is not just about shipbuilding. It's about energy security, naval reach, trade corridors, Indian Ocean control, export competitiveness, right? Ports alone are not enough. Without shipbuilding, you will still depend on someone else's industrial backbone. Not just that. Look at this Iran war. What happened? US was asking for help from its NATO partners, United Kingdom, and all these countries to use their bases. They did not allow United States to do so. Think about it. Okay, this is why method 3, the shipbuilding, is very, very important. Okay, and that's how you will replace China. You got to have full stack in everything that you do. Okay, and the fourth method is steel. Okay, this sounds sort of boring, but until you realize that steel is the skeleton of industrial power. Steel is one common denominator or common ingredient since the first industrial revolution, and to this day. Only difference is that first in the first and second industrial revolutions, British actually stole Chinese and India's steel making methods, and they called it their own. Okay, and that's how they survived the first, and they basically not survived, but I would say they so-called call themselves leader of in the first and the second industrial revolution. But right now, coming back to today, China produces more than 1 billion tons of crude steel every year. And what China does is this: China produces extra steel so that China can actually dump these steels in other countries and their markets, so that local steel manufacturing actually is gone. Okay, probably you might have heard this thing during the trade war in 2024-2025 timeframe. You might have heard that Chinese steel has been banned too. There has been embargo on it, and China has steel surplus. So what China is doing now is that China is using the surplus to flood the market, so that the local markets are basically dead, they're killed. Now, coming back to India, India is second globally, but far behind at roughly 140 to 150 million tons. And that gap explains everything: infrastructure, defense, shipbuilding, railways, ports, power systems, everything begins with steel. Okay, and I will give you a perfect example. Perfect example is that India and Russia are working together on making more icebreakers for the Arctic. India is actually working on building 4 Arctic icebreakers. But the problem is this: problem is not the technology. Problem is the special steel that is required to build those icebreakers. Only Russians have that. India doesn't even manufacture or produce that steel. And China understood all this steel requirement quite early. That's why it became the factory of the world. Now, let me actually do some correction here again. It's not that China understood it early or something, or and India didn't understand it or something. India did understand. China, only difference was that uh, India being a democracy, things are slightly slow in India. Okay, so industrialization, manufacturing, and all that it has been quite slow. But China has been a more like a empire. Okay, a kingdom that adopted the communist way of system. That's what West calls it, but China technically is a dynasty. Okay, and they can do these things faster, right? Anyways, so India is now trying to close the gap, and South Korea's POSCO is central to that strategy. Okay, so what happened is that in 2026, POSCO and JSW moved forward on a major steel project in one of the India's states called Odisha is the state. Okay, the planned investment is around $1 billion with target capacity of around 6 million tons per year. In the same state, actually, they moved to that state because uh, in Odisha, actually, there is another steel plant over there too. Okay, it's called Rourkela Steel Plant. All right, so there is there that so that's why. Now this matters because steel is not just a commodity. Manufacturing steel is very very important. The whole entire thing. So it's a strategic capacity. Like I said, it's never about semiconductors. Never about shipbuilding. It's never about just steel. It's about the strategic capacity. Without steel, there is no shipbuilding. If you want to build the ship, you need to have the steel, right? That is method 3. Then comes your without steel, there is no defense manufacturing. That goes to method 1, right? And without steel, there is no industrial sovereignty. So what? Build steel capacity. So use Korean industrial expertise. I would say expertise as well as, you know, additional hand. If you want to fill that gap, you need additional partners, additional hand to move things faster, because building and manufacture all this and setting up a manufacturing unit requires money and all, right, money, investment. Then it requires faster output and all that, right? So you need partners, more and more steel plants, more and more partners, more and more investments into all these things. Okay, so this is how you build what? A steel stack to support any other stack too. Okay, so this is another method. That's how India and South Korea are working together to counter China's supply chain, steel supply chain. Okay, so now let's look into the method. See, the fifth method is free trade agreement. Yes, you can sign everything and anything together. You can sign lots of MOUs. You can sign lots of semiconductor, steel, build this and that. You can do all kinds of paper signing. But if you don't have free trade agreement to counter all the unnecessary red tapes, to get rid of all those red tapes, okay, then it's pointless. You just cannot scale that thing in a cost effective way. To scale anything in a cost effective way, India needs the free trade agreement. And this is why India and Korea have already signed comprehensive economic partnership agreement, that is called CEPA. The same agreement that India has signed with Canada, the same agreement India has signed with Australia, and I believe same agreement India has signed with New Zealand. Okay, India signed this with South Korea in 2009 and then implemented in 2010. And now in 2026, just this month in April, they have both sides have decided, and they have agreed to upgrade it. Okay, so, and at the same time, India is what? India is also pushing for a stronger trade access with what? European Union, United Kingdom, GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, then New Zealand, Australia, and other Indo-Pacific markets. And lots of these are in final stages. Like New Zealand, they're about to sign that, finalize the whole thing. Then they're about to finalize the same thing with Australia too. And they signed with the European Union and all, right? So now combine all that with the Korean industrial investment. So this creates what? This creates a powerful model. Korean technology enters India, manufacturing happens inside India, exports leave India to into free trade agreement markets. That means India gains both what? Production efficiency and market access at the same time. And this is called supply chain arbitrage. Okay, and this is something President Trump has been wanting to do, but I think that he's not very good with his mouth, So when you don't know diplomacy, then you cannot do it. So instead of choosing East and West, India basically becomes the bridge production zone between East and West both. Now, why this is important for India? See, it's not about just countering China, okay, in manufacturing and all that. The problem with India is that India is the fourth largest economy. Yeah, because of the rupee depreciation, its GDP ranking fell a little bit below. But That's where the problem is. It's the fourth largest economy, it's the fastest growing major economy and all that, but its currency is, it does not behave like the like a major economy's currency, like Japan, or say Canada, or say UK and all that. The reason being that India imports more than India exports, and that trade deficit is almost of $300 billion. So India just wants to fill that gap really fast, and only way for India to do that is by trading with the Western countries, because in general Western countries are the consumers for the most part. So because they are consumers, and whatever India is going to produce they're going to consume, so that actually helps India in filling that gap between the export and its import. Okay, and once that gap is fulfilled, I mean that gap is filled completely, then what's going to happen is that when exports are in surplus, that's when you will see India's currency will start to appreciate instead of depreciate. Okay, and it will start to improve. Okay, so this is the method number 5 for you guys. So, in the end, I will tell you this, that most people, they still think that power is about armies alone, military and having missiles and this and that. But reality is that true power is actually, I would say, true power begins way earlier. It begins in your manufacturing capacity, in factories, in steel plants, in shipyards, in semiconductor lines, in defense production chains. And this is where great powers are built. The day, sometime in 2015 or so, America decided to give away all the manufacturing. In fact, 2015 or before that, I can't remember actually. When America decided to give away all its manufacturing and move it to China, that was the downfall of America. That's when it actually began, downfall. Okay, it didn't look like it, but it began then. And today in the Iran war, we can see that happening consistently. All right. So coming back to India and South Korea, India and South Korea are not trying to create another diplomatic story or headline or something. They are working to build the industrial depth. That depth where, how back in the day Japan, TSMC, and South Korea used to do. Now it will be mainly India and South Korea and probably Japan. And TSMC will be out, because surprisingly, TSMC is not part of POSCO Silica because of China's Taiwan claim and all that. So, POSCO Silica, United States decided that let's leave Taiwan out of it. Okay, so what happened? Quietly, systematically, strategically, they kept Taiwan out of this whole thing. Okay, so with all this, what we are learning is that future belongs to those who control the system underneath, who control the supply chain, who control the full stack. Okay, so if you control the stack, you control the world, you're going to dominate it. And that's what India and South Korea are working to do. Okay, so this is it for this video, guys. Please do like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.